Okay, here we are at Lesson 3, Unit 4. We're going to take a look now at that second triad of the Toulmin model. Now we've looked at that first triad, that claim, data, and warrant, and now we need to move on and take a look at that second triad of some of those underlying dynamics. Now you'll see here the three parts of that second triad: the qualifier, the reservation, and the backing. We'll go through and take a look at each one of these to give you an idea of how these function in the arguments. Now first of all, the backing. Now this is evidence or reasoning supporting the truth of the validity of the warrant. Now it's important to note that this is evidence or reasoning that supports your reasoning process. It's not specifically supporting the claim, it's not directly supporting the data, it's supporting the reasoning process. And so it's a little different than data. Okay, so do note that it specifically supports that warrant. Now as you go through and look at the different types of warrants, or those different types of arguments that we've talked about, there are some standard types of backing. So an argument by generalization, you would need evidence to support the universality of the statement. If it's an argument by authority, you need evidence supporting the credibility or the expertise of the source. If it's an argument by cause, you need evidence supporting the strength of the causal argument. So I mean, you can see here how the backing is evidence supporting the warrant, that reasoning process. So an argument by analogy, you need evidence that supports that the similarities of the items or situations being compared outweighs the differences. And finally, an argument by sign, just to support that the concurrent appearance of those indicators is common. In other words, that those items that you are using as data frequently show up in relationship to the claim. So again, notice that you're talking about evidence that supports your reasoning process, not necessarily or not directly the data, not directly the claim. Now the qualifier is something that really is quite unique to the Toulmin model. This is a word or phrase indicating the degree of certainty being advanced, such as possibly or probably. Now, if there is no qualifier, the lack of a qualifier means absolute certainty is being asserted. So, first of all, the Toulmin model allows us to identify that there can be degrees of certainty about a claim. It doesn't have to be absolutely that you're advancing it or absolutely wrong, but rather that can be room for degrees of certainty in there. However, if there is no qualifier that is stated, we then have to assume that the arguer is advancing absolute certainty. To look at some types of qualifiers, and notice how it would range from absolute uncertainty to absolute certainty. On the absolute uncertainty, things like unlikely would indicate that there's not very much confidence in that claim, all the way to words like probably would indicate a high degree of certainty, although allowing for the possibility of it not being true. So a qualifier then is just a word or a phrase that indicates to the receiver that there is a degree of certainty here, and that if that qualifier is absent, what we must assume is that absolute certainty is being asserted by the arguer. Now, in addition to that qualifier indicating that there's a degree of certainty, it's also possible within the argument itself to assert the conditions under which the claim would not be true, and this is your reservation. So in this, what you're basically saying is, my claim is true except if these other conditions apply. This is often phrased with statements such as if then. Well, if this is true, then my argument is true. In other words, it's kind of a condition under which the claim would be true, which also implies a condition under which the claim would not be true. Often phrased also as unless this is the case. So notice it's allowing for a specific exception to the rule. And you'll notice too when you look at that drawing that in the previous slide that the line goes to the qualifier. In a sense, what it's doing is it's telling us the conditions under which the claim would not be true, so it's clarifying that qualifier to a large degree. So if you take a look at this in terms of an argument by generalization, okay, teachers should not use profane language. There is no qualifier that is specifically asserted, and as a result we have to assume certainty. The backing for the warrant would be other professionals do not use profane language. Now notice you can argue that. It doesn't make it true or anything, but it's simply you're trying to provide other reasoning to support your warrant, but you can still argue those things. Reservation, perhaps something like, unless experiencing an extreme situation. Notice how that would say in effect that in that situation the claim is not true. Now, when it comes to implied parts of the argument, so if there is no qualifier stated, we assume certainty. If there is no reservation stated, we do not assume any implied reservation. We just assume it's not there. If there is no backing provided, we do not imply it. It is up to the arguer to provide these things. Okay, another example. The claim is, I'm sure it's cold outside. Well, notice I'm sure is pretty confident, so that would be certainty. The reservation, unless it's a very unusual situation. And again, I'm putting these in to show you what this could look like, but if that's not stated, then we don't imply it. We do not, I just assume it's there. The warrant, snow and wind are signs of cold temperatures. Notice the backing. The presence of snow and wind historically demonstrates the presence of cold temperatures. So this argument by sign would be backed by showing how those variables usually show up together. Another argument by sign, it was a good show. Again, notice there's no qualifier put in here, so we'd have to assume certainty. A possible reservation, unless I miss something, but again, if it's not stated in the argument, we don't imply it, but for the sake of discussion here, that certainly could be a reservation. The warrant, a good show has good acting, good script, and a good set. So how would you back that? Well, you provide evidence that the presence of a good set, a good script, and good acting historically demonstrate that a show is good. So again, it's evidence to prove that, or to support, that the warrant is a strong warrant. In this argument by cause, okay, John performed poorly on his speech. Again, no qualifier, so we have to assume certainty. Unless there's some other reason for his poor performance, well, we don't know. The backing for this argument by cause give evidence of other situations where the lack of proper preparation leads to poor performance. And I think that'd be pretty easy to do. So that backing for the warrant would just prove, or at least give support to the idea that there's a cause-effect relationship between practice and poor performance. Okay, this other argument by cause, just this other way of looking at it, really lays out exactly the same way. We just flipped it around, if you recall, but still the qualifier, reservation, backing break down the same way.